Before we dive into the story, I have a quick request. If you find yourself enjoying the narrative, please hit that like button. It really helps me know that you're loving what you're hearing. Also, I'm looking for new locations for future stories, so if there is a specific town or city you'd love to see a story take place in, drop the name in the comments below. Now, let's get started.
There are certain things a grown woman should never have to admit to, and being physically wedged between a plate glass window and a taxidermy elk named Bartholomew is at the very top of that list. Just pivot. I whispered to myself, my face pressed against the cold glass of my shop, take it or leave it. Pivot, Samantha. You are a graceful gazelle. You are a geometrical wizard. I was neither of those things. I was a pretzel. A very stuck, very panicked pretzel, wearing vintage boots that had far too little traction for the slick hardwood floor. My right leg was hooked over Bartholomew's antlers. Don't ask how. Physics took a holiday, and my left arm was pinned under a crate of antique doorknobs. I had only been back in Telluride for 3 weeks. In that time, I had successfully managed to reopen Mom's shop, offend the mayor by accidentally insulting his toupee, and now I was becoming part of the window display. A shadow fell over the sidewalk outside. My heart did a traitorous little salsa dance in my chest because I knew that silhouette. It was roughly the size of a vending machine, shaped like a Greek god, and belonged to the only man in Colorado capable of making my brain liquefy and leak out of my ears. Keaton Rhodes. He stopped. He squinted at the glass. I squeezed my eyes shut. Maybe he thinks I'm a mannequin. A very realistic, hyperventilating mannequin? The bell above the door jingled, signaling my doom. Sam? His voice was a low rumble, the kind of sound that vibrated right through the floorboards and settled deep in my stomach, pulling tight on a knot of desire I'd been trying to ignore since I crossed the county line. I'm busy, I squeaked. My voice was about an octave higher than usual. Inventory. Very complex. Top secret. I heard the heavy thud of his work boots approaching. The air in the shop, usually smelling of old paper and peppermint wax, suddenly shifted. It became heavier, charged with static. Then came his scent, not some fancy cologne, but the sharp, clean smell of cut pine and cold metal from the hardware store, mixed with the crisp mountain air clinging to his jacket. It was an intoxicating assault on my senses that made my toes curl inside my boots. Sam, he said again, his voice thick with suppressed laughter, is your leg? Are you wrestling the elk? Bartholomew started it. I snapped, opening one eye. Keaton leaned over the display partition. He was wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, exposing forearms that looked like they were carved out of mahogany and anchored with steel cables. A smudge of grease marked his jawline. He looked rough, capable, and devastatingly handsome. His dark brown eyes crinkled at the corners. Do you need a hand, or should I place a bet on the elk? I have this completely under control. I lied. I tried to wiggle my hip free. Bartholomew shifted. The crate of doorknobs groaned. Okay, fine, get me out, but if you tell anyone, I will tell your father about the time you tried to microwave a glow stick. Keaton vaulted over the low partition with an annoying amount of grace for a man his size. The space was cramped. Suddenly, he was everywhere. His knees brushed mine as he crouched. His heat radiated off him like a furnace, scorching through my thin sweater. Hold still, he murmured. He placed one large, calloused hand on my waist to steady me. My breath hitched. It was a physical blow, that touch. His grip was firm, his fingers digging slightly into the soft curve of my side. The contact sent a jolt of electricity straight down my spine, sizzling and popping along my nerve endings. I went rigid, staring at the hollow of his throat, watching his pulse beat in time with the frantic hammering of my own heart. I'm going to lift the crate, he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. He was close, too close. I could count the eyelashes framing those chocolate eyes. You unhook your leg. Ready? Ready. I breathed. He lifted the heavy crate like it was filled with feathers. I scrambled, unhooking my leg from the antlers and tumbling backward. But there was no room to fall. Instead, I crashed straight into Keaton's chest. He caught me. Of course he did. His arms wrapped around me, iron hard and secure, pulling me flush against him. For a second, neither of us moved. The world narrowed down to the point of contact between our bodies. I could feel the hard planes of his chest, the heat of his thighs against mine, the sheer overwhelming solidity of him. The air between us crackled, thick and volatile. My gaze dropped to his mouth. He had full lips, usually quirked in a smirk, but now pressed into a serious line. I wanted to bite them. The urge was so violent, so irrational, it terrified me. He looked down at me, his pupils blown wide, swallowing the brown. His breathing was jagged. The friendly neighbor mask slipped, just for a fraction of a second, revealing a hunger that matched the gnawing ache in my own belly. You okay, kid? He asked, but the nickname lacked its usual brotherly dismissiveness. It sounded strained, rough. I pushed myself off his chest, smoothing my hair and trying to regain a shred of dignity. I'm fine. Bartholomew is a menace. I'm turning him into glue. Keaton cleared his throat and stepped back, running a hand through his dark hair. The loss of his heat was immediate, leaving me shivering. Right, well, Dad sent me over. Said your back door hinges were squeaking. They are, I said, leaning against the counter to stop my knees from trembling. But that can wait. How about a peace offering, since you saved me from being mounted on the wall? I grabbed a jar of my homemade bourbon caramel chews. On the house. He took the jar, his fingers brushing mine. Sparks. Actual, literal sparks seemed to fly. We both flinched. Thanks, he muttered, backing toward the door. Try to stay upright, Sam. No promises. I called out. As the door closed behind him, I slumped against the register, exhaling a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 3 weeks. Specifically, since the night I walked into the Tap and Chug. 3 weeks earlier, moving back to Telluride wasn't exactly my plan A. It wasn't even plan C. It was more like plan, life imploded, so here we are. Paul, my ex-fiancé, a man who thought fun was organizing his sock drawer by fabric density, had made it clear that my quirks were liabilities. When I broke it off, I expected relief. I got it, along with a massive dose of panic. So I came home. That first night, the mountain air felt like a baptism. I had spent an hour curling my hair and squeezing into a pair of jeans that Paul had hated because they left nothing to the imagination. That was the point. I needed a drink, and I needed to feel like Samantha Malloy again, not the pastel-wearing robot Paul wanted. I pushed open the heavy wooden door of the Tap and Chug Tavern. The noise hit me first. Laughter, the clink of glass, the thrum of classic rock. Then the warmth. I scanned the room looking for a friendly face and landed on Keaton Rhodes. He was standing at the bar, laughing at something the bartender said. He held a bottle of beer loosely in one hand. He looked different. The last time I saw him, I was 19, and he was the 26-year-old guy who fixed my flat tire and patted me on the head. Now he was a masterpiece of blue-collar perfection. The bar lights gleamed on his dark hair. His shoulders were broad enough to carry the entire town's expectations. I walked up behind him. Hey, stranger! Keaton turned. The smile on his face froze. His eyes swept over me, starting at the boots, traveling up the denim that hugged my hips, lingering on the black tank top, and finally meeting my eyes. He didn't speak. He just stared. The look wasn't polite. It was visceral. It was a look that stripped me bare and set my skin on fire. It felt like being touched. Everywhere. All at once. Then, his fingers went slack. The beer bottle slipped from his hand. Smash! Amber liquid exploded across the floor, splashing onto his work boots. The bar went silent for a heartbeat. Smooth, Rhodes. I grinned, my heart doing backflips. I have that effect on people. Usually they run away, though. Keaton blinked, shaking his head as if waking up from a concussion. He looked down at the shattered glass, then back at me. A slow, dark flush crept up his neck. Sam? He choked out. Holy! He stopped himself, swallowing hard. You're back. I'm back, I said, stepping over a puddle of IPA to give him a hug. He hesitated, then wrapped his arms around me. It was meant to be a friendly greeting, but the moment our bodies touched, the dynamic shifted violently. The air between us grew heavy, charged with a magnetic pull so strong it made me dizzy. I felt the hard wall of his chest, the heat radiating through his shirt. I smelled him, soap and sawdust back then, and I wanted to bury my face in his neck and inhale. He pulled back quickly, almost as if I burned him. You look grown up. It happens, I teased, though my voice was breathless. Beers on me? Yeah, he rasped, his eyes dark and unreadable. Beers on you. Present day. The bell on the shop door jingled again, snapping me out of the memory. I hoped it was Keaton coming back to confess his undying lust. It wasn't. A delivery man stood there, holding a bouquet of white lilies so large it looked like a funeral arrangement for a circus elephant. Delivery for Samantha Malloy, he mumbled. I sighed. The residual heat from Keaton's visit instantly replaced by a cold dread. Let me guess, no card necessary? I signed for them and set the monstrosity on the counter. There was a card, of course. Creamy, heavy stock. Sam, this little break has gone on long enough. You've had your fun playing shopkeeper. I've spoken to a realtor in Telluride. He says the market is good for selling that dusty old building. Call me. We have a wedding to replan. Paul the First stared at the card. The audacity of this man was truly a marvel of modern science. He didn't just cross boundaries, he bulldozed them and built condos on top. Playing shopkeeper, I muttered, ripping the card into confetti. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Keaton. Keaton, forgot to mention. My dad invited you for dinner Sunday. Mom's making lasagna, don't be late. And stay away from the elk. I looked at the text, then at the shredded card from Paul. The contrast was laughable. Paul wanted me to sell my heritage and become a trophy wife. Keaton wanted to feed me lasagna and mocked my war with taxidermy. My thumb hovered over the screen. Me, I'll be there. If I bring dessert, do I get to pick the music? Keaton, only if it's not that sad indie folk stuff. I have a reputation. Me, you dropped a beer because I looked good in jeans. Your reputation is shot, Rhodes. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Keaton, just bring the dessert, Malloy. I grinned, the knot in my stomach loosening. The tension with Keaton was dangerous, confusing, and probably a terrible idea given our family history. But reading that text, feeling the phantom pressure of his hands on my waist from earlier, it was the only thing that felt real. I grabbed the oversized lilies and unceremoniously dumped them into the trash bin behind the counter. Take it or leave it, Paul, I said to the garbage. I'm leaving it. I turned back to the shop floor. Bartholomew the elk seemed to be judging me from his glass prison. Don't look at me like that, I told him. Sunday is lasagna night. And I have to figure out what to wear that says I'm a responsible business owner, but also, please, drop another beer. This was going to be a long week. 4 days of agonizing silence and 2 minor burns from hot sugar syrup later, Sunday finally arrived. If there is a circle of hell reserved for people who overthink their outfit choices for a casual family dinner, I had already earned a penthouse suite. My bed was currently buried under a mountain of rejected clothing, sweaters that were too bulky, blouses that were too sheer, and skirts that made me look like I was auditioning for a production of The Sound of Music. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, assessing the final contender. High-waisted denim that hugged my curves with the tenacity of a barnacle, and a soft cream-colored cashmere sweater that had a habit of slipping off one shoulder. It said, I am a relaxed, successful business owner who definitely did not spend 45 minutes curling her hair to look like she just woke up. You've got this, I told my reflection. It's just lasagna. It's just the Rhodes family. It's just Keaton. My stomach did a treacherous little flip at his name. The memory of his chest against mine in the shop window had been playing on a loop in my brain for 96 hours. It was distracting. I had accidentally priced a rare 1920s fountain pen at $4 and nearly sold a first edition comic book as a placemat. I grabbed the box of salted whiskey caramel turtle clusters I'd made, my peace offering and dessert contribution, and headed out the door. The drive to the Rhodes house was short, winding up the valley where the air thinned and the pines grew thick and ancient. Their place was a sprawling log cabin that looked like it had grown directly out of the mountainside. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, promising warmth and carbs. I parked my beat-up SUV next to Keaton's massive black truck. The size difference between our vehicles was comical. It felt like a metaphor for our entire dynamic, me scrambling and scraping by, him solid, imposing, and capable of hauling heavy machinery. I barely made it to the porch steps before the front door swung open. Martha Rhodes, a woman whose hugs could crack ribs and cure depression, stood there wiping her hands on an apron. Samantha Malloy, she shouted, beaming. Look at you! You're so thin. Are you eating? Tell me you're eating. I eat, Martha, I laughed as she engulfed me. She smelled like oregano and fabric softener. I practically live on sugar. Sugar doesn't count. Frank, Sam's here. Frank Rhodes appeared behind her, holding a glass of red wine. He looked like an older, weathered version of Keaton, minus the brooding intensity. Welcome home, kiddo. Heard you had a tussle with an elk the other day. I groaned as we moved inside. Does the entire town know? Keaton mentioned it. Frank chuckled, taking the box of chocolates from my hands. Said you had good form on the takedown, though. The house was exactly as I remembered. Warm wood, overstuffed leather furniture, and a fire roaring in the stone hearth that took up half the living room wall. It was cozy and safe, a stark contrast to the sterile beige apartment Paul and I had shared in Denver. Where is the tattletale? I asked, scanning the room and trying to keep my voice casual. Shower, Martha said, waving a hand toward the stairs. He was at the store all day. You know how he is. Can't sit still? As if summoned, a heavy footfall creaked on the stairs. I looked up, and the breath evacuated my lungs in a rush. Keaton was descending the staircase. He had clearly just scrubbed up. His dark hair was damp, curling slightly at the ends where it touched his collar. He had swapped the grease-stained flannel for a fitted gray Henley that clung to his chest and arms like a second skin. The top 3 buttons were undone, revealing a hint of tanned skin and a dusting of dark hair. He looked clean, fresh, and dangerous. He stopped on the bottom step, one hand on the newel post, his gaze locking onto mine. The room seemed to tilt. The friendly chatter of his parents faded into background static. For a moment, there was just the heat of his stare, heavy and knowing, tracking the slide of the sweater off my shoulder. My mouth went dry. The pull was instantaneous, a hook in my navel yanking me toward him. It wasn't just attraction, it was a gravitational force. "Hey, kid," he said. His voice was lower than usual, rough like gravel crunching under tires. "Hey," I managed, my voice sounding breathy. I cleared my throat violently. "I brought chocolate to bribe you into silence regarding the elk incident, but apparently your father is already informed." Keaton's lips twitched. He walked over, closing the distance between us. The scent of him hit me. Soap, clean water, and the underlying earthy musk that was just him. It made my knees feel like jelly. "I only told him the highlights," Keaton murmured, stopping close enough that I had to crane my neck to look at him. His dark eyes danced with amusement. "I left out the part where you threatened to glue the antlers." "That was a valid threat." "You look nice, Sam." The amusement vanished, replaced by an intensity that made my skin prickle. His gaze dropped to my mouth, then back up to my eyes. "The mountain air suits you." "Lasagna?" Martha bellowed from the kitchen, shattering the tension before I could do something stupid, like grab his shirt and pull him down for a kiss. Dinner was a boisterous affair. Martha piled my plate high enough to feed a linebacker, and Frank regaled us with stories about his impending retirement to Florida. I laughed, I drank the wine, but every time I moved, I was hyper-aware of Keaton sitting across from me. His leg brushed mine under the table once. Just a graze of denim against denim. I nearly dropped my fork. He didn't pull away immediately. He let the contact linger for a beat, his dark eyes fixed on his plate as he chewed, a muscle in his jaw jumping. The heat formed that small point of contact rushed up my thigh, settling hot and heavy low in my belly. "So Samantha," Frank said, oblivious to the fact that his son was playing footsie with my nervous system. "How's the shop numbers? Tourism picking up?" "It's getting there," I said, shifting my leg away and regretting the loss of contact instantly. "I'm restructuring the inventory. Less kitsch, more vintage. It's a slow process." "Paul must have had a lot of opinions on that," Keaton said quietly. The table went silent. I looked up. Keaton wasn't looking at his food anymore. He was staring right at me, his expression unreadable, his fork resting on the edge of his plate. "He did," I said, keeping my voice even. "He thought I should turn it into a high-end juice bar. Or sell it and buy a condo in Vail." "Idiot," Keaton grunted. He took a sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving mine. "He never understood what that place meant to you." "No," I admitted, a lump forming in my throat. "He didn't." My phone, sitting on the table next to my wine glass, buzzed angrily. The screen lit up. "Paul." 3 missed calls. The vibration rattled the silverware. I reached for it, intending to silence it, but Keaton was faster. His hand shot out, not to take the phone, but to cover my hand with his own. His palm was warm, rough, and engulfed mine completely. "Don't," he said. It wasn't a request. "He's persistent," I whispered. "He's harassing you." Keaton's thumb swept over my knuckles, a soothing, possessive rhythm that was at odds with the hard edge in his voice. "Do I need to pay him a visit?" "Keaton," Martha warned gently. "No," I said quickly, pulling my hand back. The loss of his touch left my skin cold. "I can handle Paul. I haven't figured out how to make him understand that. No is a complete sentence." "Some men need it spelled out in simpler terms," Keaton said darkly. "Who wants dessert?" I stood up abruptly, desperate to diffuse the sudden violence in the air. "The turtles are sticky, so nobody touched the furniture. We moved to the living room for coffee and chocolates." The mood lightened, but the air around Keaton remained charged. He watched me like a hawk, tracking my movements as I passed the plate around. After 20 minutes of polite conversation, the heat in the room became stifling. The fire was too hot, the wine was hitting my bloodstream, and Keaton's gaze felt like a physical weight. "I'm going to step out on the porch," I announced. "Get some fresh air." "I'll join you," Keaton said, standing up before I'd even finished the sentence. We stepped out into the crisp night. The temperature had dropped, the mountain chill biting through my thin sweater. I wrapped my arms around myself, walking to the railing to look out at the darkness of the valley. The door clicked shut behind us. "Here," Something heavy and warm settled over my shoulders. Keaton's flannel shirt. He must have grabbed it from the mudroom on the way out. It engulfed me, smelling of him, pine and warmth. "Thanks," I murmured, pulling the fabric tighter. Keaton leaned against the railing beside me, looking out at the tree line. In the moonlight, his profile was sharp, severe. "I wasn't joking, Sam, if he shows up here." "He won't," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure. "Paul hates the outdoors. He thinks nature is dirty." Keaton turned to face me. The shadows hid his eyes, but I could feel the intensity radiating off him. "Why were you with him?" The question was blunt. "Because he was safe," I admitted, looking down at my hands buried in his sleeves. "Because he had a plan. Because I thought if I followed the rules and colored inside the lines, I wouldn't make a mess of things like I usually do." "You're not a mess, Sam. I got stuck in a window with a dead elk 4 days ago, Keaton." "You're vibrant," he corrected, ignoring my deflection. He took a step closer. The space between us evaporated. "You're chaotic, sure. But you're real." Paul wanted a paper doll. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed in my ears. He was so close now. I could see the rise and fall of his chest. "I'm terrified I'm going to fail," I whispered, the confession slipping out before I could stop it. "The shop. The life here. I'm afraid everyone is just waiting for Samantha to screw it up again." Keaton reached out. His fingers brushed my jaw, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was gentle, reverent, but his fingertips burned a trail across my skin. "I'm not waiting for that," he rasped. His hand lingered on my neck, his thumb grazing the pulse point that was fluttering wildly. He stepped in, his body shielding me from the cold, his heat wrapping around me. I tilted my head back, looking up at him. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing the iris, dark pools of desire that threatened to drown me. "Keaton," I breathed. I didn't know if it was a warning or an invitation. He lowered his head. His gaze dropped to my lips, and his breath ghosted over my mouth. Warm, smelling of coffee and chocolate. The tension snapped tight, a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. Every nerve ending in my body was screaming, lit up with electricity. I wanted him to close the gap. I wanted him to crush his mouth against mine and erase the last 3 years of bad decisions. His hand tightened slightly on the back of my neck, tilting my head further. "Sam," he groaned, a sound torn from his chest. "I have wanted to do this since you walked into the bar in those damn jeans." My lips parted. "Then do it." The headlights of a car swept across the driveway, illuminating us in a harsh, blinding glare. We sprang apart like guilty teenagers. A sleek silver sedan crunched up the gravel drive, looking completely out of place against the backdrop of mud-splattered trucks and log cabins. My stomach dropped through the floorboards of the porch. I knew that car. "You have got to be kidding me," I hissed. Keaton stiffened beside me. His posture shifted instantly from lover to fighter. Shoulders squared, hands balling into fists at his sides. "Is that him?" "That's him," I confirmed, watching the driver's door open. Paul stepped out. He was wearing a beige trench coat and loafers. In the mud, if I weren't so horrified, I would have laughed. "Samantha!" Paul called out, spotting us on the porch. He waved a manicured hand. "I tracked your phone!" "We need to talk about your floral preferences." I looked at Keaton. The vein in his temple was throbbing. "Stay here," Keaton said, his voice deadly calm. Keaton, no. But he was already moving down the stairs, looking like a tank rolling into battle against a man armed with nothing but entitlement and a trench coat. "This," I muttered to the night sky, "is not going to end well." Watching Keaton Rhodes descend the porch stairs was like watching an avalanche in slow motion. Beautiful, terrifying, and absolutely impossible to stop. "Keaton, wait!" I scrambled after him, nearly tripping over the hem of my jeans. The gravel bit into the soles of my boots as I hit the driveway, my breath puffing out in white clouds against the night air. Paul stood by his silver sedan, looking entirely too pleased with himself for a man wearing Italian loafers in a mud season notoriously known as the suck. He adjusted his trench coat, oblivious to the fact that he looked like a lost investment banker trying to foreclose on a bear den. "Samantha," Paul said, his smile tight and practiced. "And the handyman neighbor, Kevin, was it?" Keaton stopped 3 feet from Paul. The size difference was comical. Paul was fit in a gym membership, elliptical machine sort of way. Keaton was built like he wrestled tectonic plates for a living. The air around Keaton practically vibrated with menace. "It's Keaton," he rumbled, his voice dropping to a register that usually signaled an imminent rockslide. "And you're trespassing." Paul chuckled. A dry, dismissive sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. Hardly trespassing. I'm here to retrieve my fiancé. We have urgent wedding business. The florist in Denver needs a deposit by morning if we want the imported orchids. Ex-fiancé. I corrected loudly, stepping between them. I put a hand on Keaton's chest, mostly to keep him from committing a felony, but partially because I needed to anchor myself. Under the flannel, his heart was hammering a heavy, violent rhythm against my palm. It made my own pulse skip a beat. Paul, I broke up with you. I moved out. I moved states. I am literally standing on a mountain to get away from you. Pre-wedding jitters, Paul dismissed, waving a hand as if swatting away a gnat. You're emotional. You always get like this when your blood sugar is low. I have a protein bar in the glove box. I felt Keaton's muscles bunch beneath my hand, turning as hard as granite. She said, leave. Keaton said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The threat was wrapped in the quiet certainty of his tone. If you take one more step toward her, the only thing you'll be importing is a tow truck to pull this rental out of the ravine. Paul blinked, finally seeming to register that the man in front of him wasn't just a rustic decoration. He looked from Keaton's clenched fists to my hand resting possessively on Keaton's chest. His eyes narrowed. I see. Paul sneered, his gaze sliding over me with a look of distaste that made my skin crawl. I didn't realize you'd already lowered your standards to the local help. The sound that tore from Keaton's throat was animalistic. That's it, I snapped. I shoved Keaton back, which was like shoving a brick wall, and marched up to Paul. Get out. Now. If you ever track my phone again, I will file a restraining order so fast your head will spin. And for the record, my standards have never been higher. Paul opened his mouth to argue, but he made the fatal mistake of shifting his weight. His left loafer lost traction on a particularly slick patch of slushy mud. His arms windmilled frantically, a desperate, uncoordinated attempt to defy gravity. It didn't work. With a wet squelch, Paul went down hard, landing squarely on his backside in a puddle of brown sludge. Mud splattered up the back of his beige trench coat. Silence stretched for a heartbeat, broken only by the wind whistling through the pines. My coat! Paul gasped, scrambling to his feet, slipping again and clutching the car door handle for dear life. This is cashmere blend. It's an improvement, Keaton drawled, crossing his arms. The lethal tension had bled out of his shoulders, replaced by a dark, smug amusement. Paul glared at us, his dignity dripping off him, along with the mud. He yanked the car door open. You are making a mistake, Samantha. A huge, messy mistake. When you're done playing rugged, give me a call. He slammed the door, revved the engine aggressively, and peeled out in reverse. The sedan fishtailed wildly, spraying more mud across the pristine white snowbanks before disappearing down the winding road. I let out a long, shaky exhale, the adrenaline crash hitting me all at once. My knees felt watery. Well, I said, staring at the empty driveway. That went well. I didn't even have to use the pepper spray. He's an idiot, Keaton said. He turned to me, and the amusement vanished from his face, replaced by that searing intensity that had nearly consumed me on the porch. Did he ever actually listen to a word you said? Rarely, I admitted. I wrapped his flannel shirt tighter around myself, suddenly aware of how cold it was, and how intimate it felt to be wearing his clothes. He preferred the sound of his own voice. He called it executive presence. Keaton took a step closer. The air between us, which had been momentarily shattered by Paul's absurdity, began to knit back together, thick and heavy. He reached out, his rough thumb brushing a stray lock of hair from my cheek. The friction sent a shiver racing down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. You defended me, I whispered, looking up at him. His eyes were dark pools, reflecting the porch light. Always, he murmured. His gaze dropped to my mouth. For a second, I thought he was going to finish what we started on the porch. My breath hitched, my lips parting in anticipation. I wanted him to. I wanted to erase the memory of Paul's sneer with the taste of Keaton's mouth, but the moment had fractured. The anger and the adrenaline were still humming too loudly in the air. Keaton seemed to realize it too. He sighed, a rough, frustrated sound, and let his hand drop from my face. I should get you back to your car, he said, his voice gruff. Before you freeze. Right, I said, ignoring the sharp pang of disappointment in my chest. Freezing. Bad. He walked me to my SUV, opening the door for me. As I climbed in, he leaned one arm on the roof, boxing me in. His face was level with mine, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Sam, he said. Yeah? He's wrong, he said firmly. About the mistake. About all of it. He shut the door before I could respond, leaving me sitting in the dark cab, my heart doing gymnastics in my chest, smelling like pine, mud, and the intoxicating scent of Keaton Rhodes. 2 weeks passed at a pace that could only be described as agonizingly slow. After the lasagna incident, I had turned avoidance into an extreme sport. I was a gold medalist in dodging Keaton. I ducked into the bakery if I saw his truck. I forgot to go to the hardware store for supplies, choosing instead to order bubble wrap online and pay exorbitant shipping fees just to avoid the possibility of running into him in aisle 4. I told myself it was because I needed space to deal with the Paul situation. But the truth? I was terrified. I was terrified because every time I closed my eyes, I felt the ghost of Keaton's breath on my lips. I was terrified because I had liked the way he looked, ready to dismantle a human being for insulting me. I was terrified because for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about safety or 5-year plans. I was thinking about broad shoulders and calloused hands. Of course, the universe has a way of punishing cowards, usually with plumbing disasters. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the sky had opened up, dumping a deluge of freezing rain on Telluride. Take it or leave it was empty, save for me and the lingering smell of damp wool. I was behind the counter, reorganizing a display of vintage postcards, when I heard it. Drip. Drip. Splash. I froze. That sound was coming from the back corner, specifically directly above the antique mahogany curio cabinet that housed my collection of mint-condition 1950s sci-fi pulp novels. No, I whispered. No, no, no. I sprinted to the back. Sure enough, water was steadily rhythmic, falling from a dark stain on the ceiling, splashing onto the top of the cabinet and pooling dangerously close to the seams. Great! Wonderful! Spectacular! I yelled at the ceiling. I grabbed a bucket from the utility closet and shoved it onto the top of the cabinet to catch the water. But the ceiling tile was already sagging, heavy and ominous. Another drip started 3 feet to the left. Then another. Panic clawed at my throat. This wasn't just a leak. This was an aquatic invasion. I needed a tarp. I needed a ladder. I needed to move a 300-pound cabinet by myself. I grabbed the edge of the mahogany beast and heaved. It didn't budge. I gritted my teeth, dug my heels in, and shoved with everything I had. Nothing. The bucket was filling up fast. Okay, I panted, wiping sweat from my forehead. Think, Sam. You are an independent woman. You can solve this. I dragged a stepladder over, grabbed a roll of heavy-duty plastic sheeting I used for wrapping furniture, and climbed up. If I could just tape the plastic to the ceiling, I could funnel the water away. I stretched up, balancing on the very top step, the one that explicitly says, "Do not stand here" in bright yellow letters. I slapped a piece of duct tape onto the wet ceiling tile. It peeled right off. Stick, I commanded. For the love of all that is holy, stick! I reached further, shifting my weight. The ladder wobbled, my arms flailed. And then, the front door bell jingled aggressively. We're closed due to indoor flooding! I shrieked, not looking back as I tried to regain my center of gravity. Sam? Keaton. The sound of his voice did 2 things. It sent a jolt of relief through me, and it distracted me just enough that my foot slipped off the plastic step. I yelped as the ladder kicked out from under me. I grabbed blindly for the ceiling fixture, which was a terrible idea, and braced for impact. But I didn't hit the floor. Strong, wet arms caught me in midair. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but instead of hard wood, I landed against a wall of solid, soaked muscle. Keaton staggered back a step under my weight but didn't drop me. He held me high against his chest, one arm hooked under my knees, the other wrapped securely around my back. I swear, he breathed, his voice vibrating against my ear. You are a hazard to your own health. I clung to his shoulders, gasping for air. He was soaking wet. Rainwater dripped from his dark hair, running down the sharp line of his jaw and soaking into the collar of his dark t-shirt. He smelled of rain, ozone, and wet metal. It was overwhelming. The roof! I squeaked, pointing a shaking finger at the ceiling. The books! The water! Keaton looked up at the sagging tile, then back down at me. His grip tightened. He didn't set me down. I've got it, he said. You can put me down, I said, though I made no move to let go. My body was pressed flush against his, and the heat radiating off him was practically steaming in the cold shop. In a minute, he rasped. He didn't move. He just stood there, holding me, staring at my face. His eyes were dark, dilated, searching mine with a hunger that made my toes curl. The rain hammered against the roof, a deafening roar that isolated us in the dim light of the shop. Water dripped from a strand of his hair and landed on my cheek. He tracked the droplet with his eyes as it rolled down to my jaw. I haven't seen you in 2 weeks, he said quietly. It sounded like an accusation. I've been busy, I lied weakly. Inventory. Very complex. Bull, he countered softly. You've been hiding. I have not. Sam, he said, shifting me slightly in his arms so that our faces were inches apart. I'm holding you. I can feel your heart beating. You're trembling. It's cold. I argued, though we both knew it was a lie. I was burning up. The way his hand gripped my thigh, the way his chest heaved against mine, it was visceral. It felt like being plugged into a live socket. "Is it?" Keaton challenged. He leaned in. His lips brushed the corner of my mouth, a feather-light touch that sent a shockwave straight to my core. I gasped, my hands tightening in his wet shirt. "Keaton," I whispered, pleading. "I came to check on the roof," he murmured against my skin, his nose grazing my cheek. "Dad said the flashing might be old. I didn't expect to catch you falling from the sky." I was pivoting. I defended breathlessly. "You were falling." He pulled back just enough to look me in the eye. "Stop running, Sam." "I'm not running," I said, my voice barely audible over the rain. "Good." He lowered me slowly, letting my body slide down the length of his until my boots touched the floor. But he didn't step back. He kept his hands on my waist, pinning me in place. "Move the cabinet," he commanded, his voice rough. "I'll get the tarp." "Yes," I said, my brain having entirely shut down. "Cabinet. Move. Yes." He released me, and the loss of contact was a physical ache. He grabbed the heavy mahogany cabinet, the one I hadn't been able to budge a millimeter, and slid it 5 feet across the floor with a grunt of effort that made my insides liquefy. He grabbed the ladder, shot me a look that promised this conversation wasn't over, and climbed up to the leak. I stood there, hugging myself, watching the muscles in his back shift under his wet shirt as he worked. My heart was still racing, my lips still tingling from that almost kiss. Paul, in his pristine trench coat, felt a million miles away. Here, in the damp, dusty shop, with the rain pounding down and Keaton Rhodes fixing my roof, things felt messy. They felt dangerous. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to clean it up. I wanted to see what happened when the storm broke. There is a specific kind of humiliation, reserved for realizing the man you've been secretly lusting after has just saved your livelihood, while you stood there clutching a bucket like a bewildered fisherwoman. Keaton descended the ladder, his boots hitting the floorboards with a heavy thud. The dripping had stopped. The roof was temporarily patched with a tarp and what looked like an entire roll of duct tape. He wiped his hands on his jeans. His t-shirt was a lost cause. It clung to him with wet, semi-translucent determination, mapping out every ridge of his abdomen and the broad expanse of his chest. It was a topographic map of bad decisions I wanted to make. "It'll hold until the storm passes," he said, pushing wet hair out of his eyes. "But you need a roofer, Sam. A real one, not a guy with a roll of tape and a death wish." "You didn't seem to have a death wish," I managed, my voice sounding a little strangled. "You looked very competent." He cracked a grin, the expression transforming his wet, severe face into something boyish and devastating. "Competent." High praise from the woman who tried to fight gravity on a plastic step stool. "Gravity is a bully," I muttered. I looked at his shivering frame. The shop was freezing, the dampness seeping into the walls. "You can't go back out there like that. You'll catch pneumonia, and your mother will murder me with a lasagna pan." Keaton looked down at his soaked shirt, then shrugged. The movement made the wet cotton pull tight across his shoulders. I physically felt my mouth water. "I'll survive the drive home." "Absolutely not." I turned and marched toward the rack of vintage men's clothing I'd curated from a boomer's estate sale in Montrose. "Strip. Silence." I froze, realizing exactly what I had just commanded. Heat rushed up my neck, likely turning me the color of a stop sign. I spun around. Keaton was watching me, his eyebrows raised, a dark, amused glint in his eyes. He hadn't moved to obey, but he didn't look opposed to the idea either. The air between us thickened, heavy with the sound of the rain and the sudden, jagged rhythm of my breathing. "I mean," I stammered, pointing a finger at him. "Change your shirt. I have inventory. Dry inventory." "Right," he drawled, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Inventory." He reached for the hem of his soaked shirt. I should have looked away. A polite person would have looked away. I was not polite. I was a scientist observing a natural phenomenon. He pulled the fabric up and over his head, revealing a torso that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite and tanned in the high-altitude sun. Muscles rippled under his skin as he discarded the wet ball of cotton on the counter. A trail of dark hair disappeared into the waistband of his jeans. My brain flatlined. "Sam? Bubba," I blurted out. He frowned. "What?" "The shirt," I squeaked, grabbing a hanger at random and thrusting it at him. "It belonged to a mechanic named Bubba. It's a classic." It was, in fact, a polyester bowling shirt from the late 70s, spanning a color palette of mustard yellow and ketchup red. The name Bubba was embroidered in cursive over the pocket. Keaton took it, eyeing the garment with deep skepticism. "You want me to wear this?" "It's dry, Keaton. Beggars can't be choosers." Put on the shirt before I charge you a rental fee. He sighed, a rumble that vibrated through the floor, and slipped it on. The fit was tight. Bubba had evidently been a smaller man than Keaton Rhodes. The sleeves strained around Keaton's biceps, and the buttons across his chest looked like they were holding on for dear life, praying for structural integrity. He looked ridiculous. He looked incredible. I look like a condiment, he stated, looking down at the mustard paneling. You look dry, I corrected, trying desperately not to stare at the way the fabric pulled when he moved. Now go, before the roads wash out. He stepped closer, invading my personal space again. The smell of rain and warm skin hit me, overriding the musty scent of the old shirt. He reached out, tapping the tip of my nose with a calloused finger. Stay off the ladder, Malloy, he murmured. If the bucket fills up, call me. Don't be a hero. I'm a strong, independent business owner, I whispered. You're a hazard, he countered softly. He lingered for a second longer, his gaze dropping to my mouth, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he was going to kiss me right there, amidst the smell of mothballs and wet dust. But he just winked, turned, and walked out into the storm, the Bubba embroidery flashing red as he disappeared into the rain. I leaned against the counter and exhaled a breath that rattled in my lungs. I was in so much trouble. 5 days later, the rain had cleared, leaving the mountains dusted with fresh snow and the roads a muddy, treacherous mess. The roof patch held, but my bank account was weeping quietly in the corner. To remedy this, I had aggressively bid on an estate lot in Durango, a collection of mid-century modern furniture that was practically guaranteed to sell to the tourists looking for rustic chic. I won the bid. The problem? The lot included a solid oak sideboard that weighed roughly the same as a Honda Civic. My SUV, the Toaster, was brave, but she was not equipped for heavy haulage, which is how I found myself standing in the driveway of the Rhodes hardware store at 6 a.m. on a Saturday, holding 2 travel mugs of coffee and a bag of cinnamon rolls as a peace offering. Keaton was already loading cargo straps into the bed of his massive black truck. He wore a canvas jacket and a baseball cap pulled low, looking entirely too awake for the hour. You're late, he said without turning around. I am precisely on time, I argued, handing him a coffee as he turned. You're just disturbingly early. Do you sleep? Or do you just power down like a robot? I sleep, he said, taking the cup. His fingers brushed mine, warm, rough, electric. We both ignored the spark. Ready to go pick up your junk? It is not junk. It is curated vintage. And yes, I climbed into the passenger seat of his truck. The cab was a sensory overload. It smelled intensely of him. Coffee, leather, and that inexplicable cold metal scent that clung to his clothes. It was clean, uncluttered, and massive. I felt tiny sitting there, my boots barely touching the floor mat. The drive to Durango was supposed to be 2 hours. It felt like 5 minutes and a lifetime all at once. We wound through the mountain passes, the engine humming a low, powerful note beneath us. Outside, the world was a blur of jagged peaks and golden aspen trees. Inside, the air was thick, with a comfortable, terrifying intimacy. So, Keaton said, one hand resting casually on the top of the steering wheel, the other holding his coffee. Paul called the store yesterday. My stomach dropped. He what? Called looking for me. Wanted to know if I was, licensed and bonded, to be working on your roof. Keaton's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the stubble. Asked if I had pulled the proper permits. I'm going to strangle him, I hissed, sinking lower in the seat. With a silk scarf. Very vintage. Very deadly. I told him if he had questions about my handiwork, he was welcome to come inspect it personally, Keaton said, a dark smirk playing on his lips. He hung up. I looked at him. The sharp profile, the confident grip on the wheel, the sheer, unbothered strength of him. Paul would have hired a lawyer. Keaton just invited the conflict to his front door. Thank you, I said softly, for dealing with him. You shouldn't have to. Keaton shifted gears, his hand brushing my knee. He didn't move it away immediately. He's a bully, Sam. Bullies don't like resistance. You just have to stand your ground. I'm trying, I admitted, but he knows exactly which buttons to push. He installed the buttons. Then we rewire the panel, Keaton said simply, as if it were just another hardware problem to be solved with pliers and grit. We arrived in Durango an hour later. The estate sale was at a sprawling ranch house that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Eisenhower administration. The seller was a woman named Dolores, who wore a caftan and enough turquoise jewelry to sink a small boat. The sideboard is in the den, Dolores announced, waving a cigarette holder. My third husband, Gerald, loved that piece. He died in that room. Not on the sideboard, thankfully. Good to know, I muttered. We found the piece. It was magnificent. It was also monstrous. Solid oak, 6 feet long with iron hardware. Okay, Keaton assessed, rolling up his sleeves. His forearms flexed, cords of muscle shifting under the skin. We lift on 3. Knees bent. Don't be a hero, Malloy. If it slips, let it go. I lift things all the time. I lied. I have core strength. Uh-huh. We grabbed the ends. 1, 2, 3. We heaved. The sideboard groaned. I groaned. It lifted about 4 inches off the ground. My face felt like it was going to explode. Pivot! I wheezed, channeling my inner Ross Geller. Don't say pivot, Keaton grunted, taking the brunt of the weight without breaking a sweat. Just walk backward. Slowly. We shuffled through the hallway, an awkward dance of heavy furniture and grunts. You okay? Keaton asked, his eyes locked on mine over the top of the oak slab. Peachy, I gasped. Just getting my cardio. We reached the front steps. This was the crux. We had to navigate 3 concrete stairs and a gravel path. I'm going to take the weight, Keaton instructed. You guide it down. Do not try to hold it up. Just stabilize. He shifted his grip, his biceps bulging, as he took practically the entire 300 pounds onto his own frame. The display of raw power was distracting. Like, really distracting. I watched the veins in his neck stand out as he lowered the beast onto the dolly. Show off, I breathed. He wiped sweat from his brow, grinning. Just basic physics, kid. We got the sideboard strapped into the truck bed without crushing any limbs. Dolores watched us from the porch, smoking thoughtfully. He's a keeper, she shouted at me as I signed the receipt. Look at those glutes! Gerald never had glutes like that. I turned bright red. Keaton, putting the final ratchet on the strap, just chuckled. She likes my glutes, Sam, he called out. Get in the truck, Rhodes, I yelled back, fleeing toward the passenger door. The drive back was quieter. The sun had dipped behind the peaks, casting long purple shadows across the road. The heater hummed, creating a cozy, sleepy cocoon. About 20 miles outside of Telluride, the truck lurched. A violent thud-thud-thud vibrated through the chassis. Keaton cursed, gripping the wheel as he guided the beast to the narrow shoulder of the mountain road. What was that? I asked, wide-eyed. Blowout, he muttered, killing the engine. Rear passenger side, just my luck. We climbed out. The tire was shredded. The mud on the side of the road was thick and sludgy, the temperature dropping rapidly with the sun gone. I have a spare, Keaton said, walking around to the back. But the jack is buried under your sideboard. I stared at the massive oak piece strapped securely over the access panel for the spare tire tools. Oh no, we have to unstrap it and slide it back, Keaton said, assessing the situation with annoying calm. In the mud. It took us 40 minutes. 40 minutes of slipping, sliding, cursing, and heave-hoing the heavy furniture in the freezing twilight. By the time Keaton had the tire changed, we were both covered in mud, exhausted, and breathing hard. He threw the tire iron into the bed and slammed the tailgate. He turned to me, wiping grease from his cheek, leaving a dark smear that only made him look more rugged. You look like a swamp creature, he observed. You look like a mechanic named Bubba, I retorted, shivering. The adrenaline of the exertion was fading, leaving the cold to bite through my jacket. My teeth started to chatter. Come here, Keaton commanded. He didn't wait for me to argue. He grabbed my waist and hoisted me up to sit on the closed tailgate of the truck. He stepped between my legs, his body blocking the wind, his hands resting on my thighs. The heat was instantaneous. You're freezing, he murmured, rubbing his hands up and down my arms to generate friction. I'm fine, I stuttered. You're shaking. He was so close. His face was inches from mine. In the dying light, his eyes were black, intense, searching. The mud on his cheek, the smell of grease and sweat, the sheer size of him boxing me in. It was overwhelming. The memory of Paul and his clean, sterile life evaporated. Keaton, I whispered. His hands stopped moving on my arms. His grip tightened on my waist. He looked down at my lips, then back up to my eyes. The hunger there was naked, raw. I'm done waiting, Sam. He rasped. He leaned in. This time there were no headlights, no delivery men, no falling ladders. His mouth crushed against mine. It wasn't a gentle, tentative first kiss. It was an explosion. It was hot, demanding, and tasted of coffee and desperation. I gasped, opening to him, and he deepened the kiss instantly, his tongue sweeping into my mouth, claiming me. I wrapped my arms around his neck, burying my hands in his hair, pulling him closer. He groaned low in his throat, a vibration that went straight to my core. He pulled me forward until I was flush against him, the hard ridge of his arousal pressing against my thigh through our jeans. The world narrowed down to this. The cold wind, the hard metal of the truck, and the inferno of Keaton Rhodes. He broke the kiss, breathless, resting his forehead against mine. His chest heaved. "I'm not letting you go again," he growled, his voice rough with wrecking ball intensity. "Paul can send all the lawyers he wants. You're mine, Sam." My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "I don't want to go." "Good." He kissed me again, hard and quick, then pulled back, his eyes blazing. "Now get in the truck." "Before you actually freeze to death, and I have to explain to your mother why I brought you home looking like a mud wrestler." I slid off the tailgate, my legs trembling so bad I almost fell. Keaton caught me, steadying me with a hand on my lower back. As we climbed back into the warm cab, the silence was different. It wasn't tense anymore. It was heavy with promises. I looked at him as he put the truck in gear. He glanced over, caught my eye, and reached across the console. He took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, and rested our joined hands on his thigh. "Next time," he said, pulling back onto the road, "we're taking the van. And I'm checking the tires." I squeezed his hand. "Deal." We drove back toward Telluride in the dark, but for the first time since I'd crossed the county line, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was finally, terrifyingly, rushing towards something real. 72 hours. That was exactly how long it had been since the incident involving the mud, the flat tire, and the kiss that had effectively rewired my central nervous system. Since that night, my life had become a blur of high-octane anxiety and giddy, stomach-flipping euphoria. Keaton Rhodes was no longer just the neighbor with the good power tools. He was the man who stopped by the shop 3 times a day, just to check the hinges, a euphemism that usually involved him backing me into a corner of the stockroom and kissing me until I forgot my own zip code. I was currently standing on a step stool, a sturdy, metal one, thank you very much, attempting to arrange a display of vintage tin robots on top of the newly acquired oak sideboard. "Left?" A deep voice rumbled from below. I looked down. Keaton was leaning against the counter, arms crossed over a chest that strained the fabric of his navy t-shirt. He looked entirely too relaxed for a Tuesday morning, and entirely too good. "Your left or my left?" I asked, gripping a rust-spotted robot named Zorg. "My left, toward the window. Zorg needs sun." "You named him Zorg? He looks like a Zorg." Keaton pushed off the counter and walked over, stopping right next to the stool. He placed a hand on my calf, his thumb rubbing slow, distracting circles against the denim of my jeans. The heat of his palm seeped through the fabric, sending a jolt of electricity straight up my leg. "Careful up there, Malloy. We know your history with altitudes greater than 2 feet, I shivered, nearly dropping Zorg. "I am perfectly safe. This stool is OSHA compliant." His hand slid higher, squeezing the back of my knee. His dark eyes were hooded, filled with a simmering intent that made my breath hitch. "Come down. I brought you coffee. I have work to do." "The coffee is hot, and I have to get to the site in 20 minutes. Come down." It wasn't a request. It was a command wrapped in velvet. My resolve crumbled like stale cake. I stepped down, and before my feet hit the floor, Keaton's hands were on my waist. He spun me around and lifted me onto the edge of the heavy oak sideboard, stepping between my thighs. "Hi," he whispered, his face inches from mine. "Hi," I breathed. He smelled like fresh lumber and peppermint soap, a combination that was rapidly becoming my favorite scent in the world. He leaned in, brushing his nose against mine, his gaze dropping to my lips. The air in the shop grew heavy, charged with a magnetic pull that made the rest of the world fade into gray static. "Did you lock the front door?" he murmured against my mouth. "No," I admitted, clutching the fabric of his shirt. "I'm expecting a shipment of antique spice jars." Keaton groaned, a low, frustrated sound that vibrated against my chest. He stole a quick, hard kiss that left my lips tingling and my brain short-circuiting. "I hate the spice jars. They're very collectible. I'm going to buy them all and smash them," he threatened, nipping at my lower lip, "just so I can have 5 minutes alone with you without a delivery driver or a tourist looking for a bathroom. Violence against glassware is not the answer." I laughed breathlessly, leaning my forehead against his. The bell above the door jingled aggressively. Keaton froze. I froze. "If that is the spice jar guy," Keaton whispered, "I'm telling him you moved to Peru." He stepped back, smoothing his expression into something resembling professional detachment, though his eyes were still dark with unspent desire. I hopped off the sideboard, smoothing my hair and trying to look like a respectable business owner, and not a woman who had just been manhandled next to a tin robot. I turned to the door with a welcoming smile. "Welcome to Take It or..." The greeting died in my throat. It wasn't a delivery driver. It wasn't a tourist. Standing in the doorway, framed by the bright morning sun, was Paul. But he wasn't alone. Standing next to him, looking like she had just stepped off a yacht in the Hamptons rather than a sidewalk in Colorado, was a woman wearing a white Chanel suit and oversized sunglasses. My blood ran cold. "Mother," Paul announced, ushering her in with a flourish. "This is the place." Eleanor Williams removed her sunglasses slowly, her eyes scanning the shop with the clinical detachment of a health inspector looking for rat droppings. Her gaze swept over the mismatched vintage furniture, the jars of homemade candies, and finally landed on me. She frowned, a minute tightening of her perfectly injected lips. "Oh, Samantha." She sighed, as if I were a stain on his silk blouse. Paul told me it was quaint. He didn't say it was cluttered. "Eleanor, I managed," my voice tight. "What a surprise." "We were in the neighborhood," Paul said smoothly, stepping forward. He was wearing a fresh beige trench coat, apparently having replaced the mud-stained casualty from last week. He spotted Keaton standing by the sideboard. Paul's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning with reinforced smugness. "Ah, the handy person. Still here?" Keaton didn't move. He stood his ground, legs shoulder-width apart, arms crossed. He looked big, dark, and dangerous compared to Paul's polished veneer. "I live here, Paul. Unlike you. Details." Paul dismissed, waving a hand. He turned to his mother. "See, Mother, this is what I was telling you. Samantha is drowning in nostalgia. She needs an intervention." I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, not the good kind Keaton inspired, but the burning, prickly heat of humiliation. "I do not need an intervention. I own a business, a profitable one." "Selling used trinkets to backpackers isn't a business, dear," Eleanor said, walking toward the counter and running a gloved finger over a display of hand-carved whistles. She inspected her glove for dust. "It's a cry for help. Paul says you're having an episode." "An episode?" I choked out. "A quarter-life crisis," Paul corrected helpfully. "The wedding stress got to you. You ran away to play shopkeeper. We understand. That's why we're here, to help you pack." Keaton took a step forward. The floorboard creaked under his boot, a sound like a warning shot. "She's not going anywhere." Eleanor turned to look at Keaton, her eyebrows rising. "Excuse me, I don't believe we've been introduced. Are you the mover?" "I'm the guy who's about to throw your son through a window if he doesn't stop talking," Keaton said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "Keaton," I warned softly, putting a hand out to stop him. I turned to Paul. "You brought your mother to bully me? Really, Paul?" "That's a new low, even for you." "We're not bullying," Paul said, looking offended. "We brought a peace offering, a solution." He snapped his fingers. A chauffeur I hadn't noticed until now scurried in from the street, carrying a large, flat portfolio case. Paul unzipped it on top of a display of vintage lace doilies, oblivious to my wince. "Look," Paul said, flipping open a blueprint. "I spoke to my developer friends. If we knock down this wall," he pointed to the load-bearing wall holding up the second floor, "and gut the inventory, we can turn this space into a premium oxygen bar. O2 by Samantha. It keeps the building, gives you a hobby, but makes it respectable." I stared at the blueprint. It was a drawing of a sterile, white room with sleek chairs and people with tubes up their noses. It was devoid of soul. It was devoid of me. "You want to turn my mother's shop into an oxygen bar?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage. "It's very trendy in Aspen," Eleanor added, picking up a jar of my bourbon caramel chews and eyeing it suspiciously. "And frankly, darling, you need a career that doesn't involve cooking sugar in a back room. It's bad for the pores." "I like the sugar," Keaton said. He moved to stand next to me, his shoulder brushing mine. A solid wall of support. "And the shop stays exactly how it is." Paul laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Sam, be reasonable. You can't possibly want this life. Look at you. You're wearing flannel. You have dust in your hair. You're wasting your potential." "My potential is none of your business," I snapped. "And get your plans off my doilies." I reached out to shove the portfolio off the lace. At the same time, Paul lunged forward to save his precious blueprints. "Careful! That's Italian leather!" he shrieked. Our hands collided. The portfolio slid, hitting a stack of heavy ceramic mixing bowls. One had stacked near the edge of the counter, an artistic choice I was now violently regretting. Gravity, my old nemesis, took the wheel. The top bowl wobbled. "Watch out!" Keaton barked, grabbing my arm and yanking me back against his chest. The bowl tipped, hit the one below it, and sent the entire stack cascading off the counter. Crash. But they didn't just hit the floor. The bottom bowl, A massive vintage Pyrex filled with decorative glass marbles clipped the edge of the display Eleanor was standing next to. The display holding 24 jars of my signature salted honey liquid caramel. The display collapsed. Jars shattered on impact. Amber, sticky, viscous caramel exploded outward like a sugary grenade. "My Chanel!" Eleanor screamed. It was a direct hit. The white skirt suit was splattered with dark gold goo. Glass shards and caramel coated her shoes. Paul, standing next to her, caught a glob of sticky sweetness right on the lapel of his trench coat. Silence descended on the shop. The only sound was the dripping of caramel onto the hardwood floor and Eleanor's hyperventilating breaths. "Oh my God," I whispered, horrified. Then a traitorous bubble of laughter rose in my throat. I clamped a hand over my mouth to suppress it. Keaton wasn't so polite. His chest rumbled against my back, and then he let out a loud, unapologetic snort. "Well," Keaton drawled, tightening his arm around my waist, "that's one way to exfoliate the pores." Eleanor looked down at her ruined suit, then up at me, her face twisting into a mask of pure fury. You clumsy little peasant! Hey!" Keaton's amusement vanished instantly. He stepped in front of me, shielding me from her venom. "Watch your mouth! It was an accident. One caused by your son throwing his weight around where it doesn't belong." "We are leaving," Eleanor hissed, shaking caramel off her hand. "Paul, get the car. I need to be sanitized immediately." "Mother, the blueprints," Paul stammered, looking between the sticky mess and his exit. "Leave the blueprints!" she shrieked. "This place is a biohazard." She turned and marched out the door, her caramel-coated heels making a sucking sound with every step. Squish! 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 Paul looked at me. He looked at Keaton, who was glaring at him with lethal intent. Then he looked at his ruined coat. "This isn't over, Samantha," Paul said, pointing a sticky finger at me. "You're clearly unstable. I'm going to speak to the town council. There are zoning laws about hazardous substances." "It's candy, Paul," I said, stepping out from behind Keaton. "It's delicious. And you're trespassing. Get out before I get the hose." Paul sneered, grabbed his leather portfolio, which was now glued to a doily, and hurried after his mother. The door slammed shut, the bell jingling cheerfully in their wake. I slumped against the counter, surveying the disaster zone. Broken glass, marbles, and gallons of expensive caramel covered the floor. It was a sticky, glittering catastrophe. "I ruined her Chanel," I moaned, burying my face in my hands. "That suit costs more than my car." "She deserved it," Keaton said firmly. He turned me around, prying my hands away from my face. "Hey, look at me." I looked up. He was grinning. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm mortified," I admitted, "and I'm out about $300 in product. And I think Paul is actually going to try and get me shut down." "He can try," Keaton said, his thumb grazing my cheek. "But he forgot one thing." "What's that?" "The Rhodes family has lived in this town for 80 years. My dad plays poker with the head of the zoning board, and the mayor owes me a favor for fixing his generator during the blizzard of 18. He leaned in, his eyes dancing. "Let him try to file a complaint. I'll bury him in red tape so thick he'll need a machete to find his way back to Denver." I stared at him. "You'd do that?" "I told you, Sam," he murmured, lowering his head until our lips were brushing. "I'm done waiting. And I'm definitely done letting that idiot make you feel small." He kissed me then, deep and slow, tasting of promises and coffee. I melted against him, the stress of the encounter dissolving in the heat of his touch. For a moment, the sticky floor and the threat of Paul didn't matter. Keaton pulled back, breathless. "Now," he said, looking down at the mess, "how do you feel about mopping? Because if we leave this, we're going to have an ant infestation of biblical proportions." I sighed, looking at the sea of caramel. "I'll get the bucket." "You get the wet floor sign." "Deal." As I headed to the back room, I couldn't help but smile. My life was a mess. My floor was a disaster. My ex-fiancé was waging war. But as I watched Keaton roll up his sleeves, exposing those corded forearms to tackle a puddle of honey caramel, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't cleaning it up alone. And that changed everything. 2 hours later, the shop smelled intensely of lemon cleaner and vinegar. The caramel was gone, though the floor remained suspiciously tacky in spots. We had flipped the sign to closed and were sitting on the counter eating the few surviving caramel chews. "So," I said, swinging my legs. "O2 by Samantha. Has a ring to it, doesn't it?" Keaton choked on his candy. "Don't even joke. If I see a single oxygen tube in here, I'm calling the fire marshal." "He just doesn't get it," I said quietly, looking around the shop. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dust motes, illuminating the clutter that Paul despised. "He sees junk. I see. Stories. That robot?" A grandfather bought it for his grandson in 1955. The sideboard? It held Christmas dinners for 40 years. It matters. Keaton placed his hand over mine on the counter. I know. He's not going to stop, Keaton. Bringing his mother was a nuclear option. He thinks if he humiliates me enough, I'll fold. Let him think that, Keaton said, his jaw setting in that hard, stubborn line I was coming to love. He underestimates you. He thinks you're the girl who needs saving. He doesn't realize you're the girl who wrestled an elk. I laughed. I feel like that elk story is going to be on my tombstone. It was impressive. He hopped off the counter and stood between my knees, his hands resting on my thighs. The playful mood shifted, deepening into something darker, heavier. Sam? Yeah? My parents are going to the hot springs in Array for the weekend. They left this morning. My heart did a traitorous double-time rhythm. Oh? The house is empty, he said, his voice dropping an octave. His thumbs traced the seam of my jeans, sending shivers racing over my skin. No roommates? No delivery drivers? No Paul? I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. The intensity in his gaze was visceral, a physical weight pressing against me. We had been dancing around this for days, stealing kisses in the shop, touches in the truck, but we hadn't crossed the line. Are you inviting me over to inspect the hinges? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Keaton shook his head slowly, his eyes locked on mine. No more excuses, Sam. I'm inviting you over to dinner. And breakfast. The implication hung in the air, thick and intoxicating. Breakfast meant staying the night. Staying the night meant, well, it meant I needed to shave my legs immediately. I like breakfast, I managed to say. Good. He leaned in, biting gently on my earlobe. I gasped, my hands gripping his shoulders. Close the shop, Sam. Let's get out of here. I looked at the door, half expecting Paul to burst in with a hazmat team, but the street was empty. Okay, I whispered. Let's go. I hopped off the counter, grabbing my keys. But as I reached for my purse, my phone buzzed on the counter. I froze. Don't answer it, Keaton said. I looked at the screen. It wasn't Paul. It was a notification from the Telluride Business Association. Urgent. Emergency town hall meeting tonight. Agenda item. Review of commercial safety standards and zoning violations for Main Street businesses. My stomach dropped. Paul didn't need a hazmat team. He moved fast. Keaton, I said, holding up the phone. Look. He read the screen, his face darkening. He called the meeting. He's going for my license, I said, panic rising in my throat. Tonight. Keaton grabbed his keys off the counter. The look on his face shifted from lover to warrior. Then we're going to the meeting. But, dinner? Breakfast? Rain check, he said, taking my hand and pulling me toward the door. First, we save the shop. Then, I take you home. I squeezed his hand, running to keep up with his long strides. You really know how to show a girl a good time, Rhodes. Just wait, he growled, unlocking his truck. The night is young. If anxiety had a flavor, it would taste like the lukewarm, stale coffee sitting in the cup holder of Keaton's truck. We were hurtling toward the town hall at a speed that was technically legal but spiritually reckless. Keaton drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the center console, his knuckles white. The interior of the truck was silent, save for the aggressive hum of the heater and the sound of my own heart trying to batter its way out of my ribcage. He can't just close me down, I said, breaking the silence for the third time in 2 minutes. Can he? I mean, it was caramel. It wasn't radioactive sludge. It was sugar and cream. High caloric content is not a zoning violation. Keaton didn't look away from the road, but his jaw tightened, the muscle feathering beneath the skin. He's banking on the shock value. He's going to use big words and expensive suits to scare the council into thinking your shop is a liability. It's a classic bully tactic. I hate bullies, I muttered, picking at a loose thread on my jeans. And I really hate suits. Keaton glanced over then. The dashboard lights cast his face in sharp relief. The strong nose, the heavy brow, the mouth that, only hours ago, had been doing very wicked things to my earlobe. The anger in his eyes softened just a fraction as they landed on me. You look ready for a fight, he noted. I looked down at myself. I was still wearing the flannel shirt and jeans I'd been mopping the floor in. My hair was thrown up in a messy bun that was slowly surrendering to gravity. I looked like I wrestled a mop bucket and lost. You look like you work for a living, Keaton corrected, his voice low and rough. Unlike the guy in the trench coat. He pulled the truck into the town hall parking lot. It was packed. Paul hadn't just called a meeting. He had apparently summoned a tribunal. Ready? Keaton asked, killing the engine. No, I admitted. But if I don't go in there, he wins. Keaton reached across the console. His hand, warm and calloused and overwhelmingly large, cupped the back of my neck. His thumb swept over the sensitive skin just below my ear, sending a shiver racing down my spine that had absolutely nothing to do with the freezing temperature outside. He doesn't win, Keaton said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made the air in the cab feel thin. Not tonight, not ever. I've got your back, Malloy. I swallowed hard, nodding. Okay, let's go save the shop. The Telluride town hall meeting room was a study in beige bureaucracy. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating a sea of metal folding chairs filled with people I'd known since kindergarten. And there, standing at the front of the room like he was delivering a TED Talk on the importance of gentrification, was Paul. He had set up an easel. He had charts. He had a laser pointer. "Samantha," Paul said as we entered, his voice dripping with faux concern. "So glad you could join us. I was just explaining to the council the volatility of your current business model." I marched down the center aisle, ignoring the whispers from the gallery. Keaton was a silent, looming shadow at my shoulder, his presence a physical shield against the room's scrutiny. "My business model is fine, Paul," I snapped, taking a seat in the front row. "It's been fine for 30 years. "Times change," Paul said smoothly, turning back to the council. Sitting behind the long table were 5 people. In the center sat Mayor Higgins, a man whose dedication to civic duty was only matched by his dedication to a hairpiece that looked suspiciously like a dormant muskrat. He looked tired. "Mr. Williams," Mayor Higgins sighed, adjusting his glasses. "You were saying something about chemical hazards?" "Precisely," Paul said, clicking his laser pointer. A photo appeared on the projector screen. My jaw dropped. It was a close-up of Eleanor's ruined Chanel suit. "This," Paul announced gravely, "is the result of a catastrophic containment failure at Take It or Leave It. My mother, a distinguished visitor to your town, was assaulted by gallons of superheated, viscous adhesive." "It was caramel," I shouted, jumping to my feet. "And it wasn't superheated. It was room temperature." "Sit down, Ms. Malloy," the mayor said, though he didn't look particularly angry. "Let him finish." I sank back into my chair, crossing my arms. Keaton leaned close, his arm pressing against mine. "Viscous adhesive?" he whispered. "He really brought a thesaurus." Paul continued his presentation. He had graphs showing potential slip-and-fall liabilities. He had a diagram of the shop highlighting structural weaknesses caused by, a quote, excessive clutter. He painted a picture of my beloved store, not as a quirky local landmark, but as a ticking time bomb of sugar and vintage furniture. In conclusion, Paul said, straightening his lapels, "It is my recommendation and the recommendation of the Williams Development Group that the business license for Take It or Leave It be suspended pending a full environmental and structural review. For Samantha's own safety, of course." He looked at me then, a small, triumphant smile playing on his lips. He thought he had me. He thought he could bury me in paperwork and fear. The room was silent. The council members looked at each other. Mrs. Gable, the town librarian, looked particularly concerned about the viscous adhesive. I stood up again. My knees were shaking, but the anger burning in my gut was hotter than any caramel I'd ever cooked. "Mayor Higgins," I said, my voice trembling slightly before finding its footing. "This isn't about safety. This is about a man who can't handle the fact that I dumped him." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Paul's smile faltered. "I grew up in that shop," I continued, gesturing to the screen. "You all did. Mrs. Gable, you bought your first set of teacups from my mother. Mayor, you buy your anniversary gifts there every year. Yes, there was an accident today. A messy one. But it happened because Paul and his mother came into my store to insult me and shove their blueprints in my face." "Objection!" Paul cried, looking around as if he were in a courtroom drama. "Hearsay!" "This isn't a trial, son," Mayor Higgins grunted. "Sit down. The point is," I said, looking Paul dead in the eye, "I am not closing. I am not selling. And I am certainly not turning my heritage into an oxygen bar for tourists who think roughing it means the hotel Wi-Fi is slow." "An oxygen bar?" Mrs. Gable gasped, clutching her pearls. "In the historic district?" "It's very chic," Paul argued, sweating slightly. "It brings a higher caliber of clientele, people who appreciate refinement, not the sort of riffraff that currently clogs up Main Street." The room went deadly quiet. Calling the locals riffraff in a town where the average resident owned 3 dogs and a Subaru was a tactical error of massive proportions. Keaton stood up. He didn't rush. He unfolded his large frame slowly, the metal chair creaking under the shift in weight. He hooked his thumbs into the belt loops of his jeans and stared at Paul. Keaton didn't need a laser pointer. He had presence. "Riffraff?" Keaton repeated, his voice a low rumble that carried to the back of the room without effort. "That's interesting, Paul. Considering that, Riffraff pulled your rental car out of a snowbank last week." Paul flushed a deep, blotchy red. That is irrelevant. Is it?" Keaton turned to the mayor. "Mayor, you know me. You know my dad. We've fixed every roof, pipe, and generator in this valley for 40 years. "That you have, Keaton?" The mayor nodded. "I was on the roof of Sam's shop last week," Keaton lied smoothly. "Doing a full inspection. Structural integrity is sound. Wiring is up to code. The only safety hazard I found was a man in a beige coat, harassing the owner." Keaton took a step toward the aisle. "Sam isn't a liability. She's the heart of this town. She came back when she didn't have to. She's trying to keep a piece of history alive while guys like him," he jerked a thumb at Paul, "want to turn us into a theme park for the wealthy." He paused, looking around the room, making eye contact with the locals. "We take care of our own here. We don't let outsiders come in and bully our neighbors just because they have a fancy degree and a bruised ego." A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. Someone in the back shouted, "Send him back to Denver!" Paul looked frantic. He grabbed his easel. "You people are missing the point, the liability, the adhesive." "Mr. Williams," Mayor Higgins interrupted, tapping his gavel, "I think we've heard enough. The council finds no evidence of zoning violations. The motion to suspend the license is denied." "What?" Paul sputtered. "But the suit! The stains!" "And furthermore," the mayor continued, narrowing his eyes, "if I hear one more report of you harassing Ms. Malloy, I will have the sheriff escort you to the county line personally. Do I make myself clear?" Paul opened his mouth, closed it, and then glared at me with pure, unadulterated loathing. He slammed his portfolio shut. "Fine," he hissed. "Have your dusty little shop. Have your riffraff. But don't come crying to me when you go bankrupt." "I won't," I said sweetly. "I'll be too busy counting my caramel money." Paul stormed out, his exit marred slightly when he tripped over an extension cord and had to do a hop skip to stay upright. The room erupted in laughter. I sank back into my chair, the adrenaline crash hitting me hard. I felt lightheaded. Keaton's hand found mine immediately, lacing his fingers through mine. His grip was an anchor. "You did good, kid," he whispered against my ear. I looked at him, feeling a surge of affection so strong it terrified me. "We did good." Meeting adjourned. The mayor called out. Then, looking directly at me, he winked. "And Sam, I'll take 2 jars of that dangerous caramel. For the wife." We didn't stay to chat. The energy between us had shifted from defensive to something far more volatile. We practically ran to the truck, the cold night air doing nothing to cool the heat radiating off our bodies. Keaton unlocked the doors, but before I could climb in, he crowded me against the side of the vehicle. His hands landed on either side of my waist, trapping me against the cold metal. "You were incredible in there," he rasped, his eyes dark and hungry. I was terrified, I admitted, my hands finding the lapels of his jacket, pulling him closer. I thought I was going to throw up on the mayor's shoes. Couldn't tell. He leaned down, his nose brushing against mine. "You stood your ground. You fought for it." "I had backup," I whispered. "Always." He kissed me then, a hard, possessive claiming that made my knees buckle. It wasn't like the kiss in the shop, or the kiss on the side of the road. This was celebratory. This was raw relief mixed with pent-up desire. His tongue swept into my mouth, tasting me, devouring the last of my resistance. I wrapped my legs around his waist, needing to be closer, needing to eliminate the friction of denim and canvas. He groaned, a guttural sound, and lifted me effortlessly, pressing me higher against the truck. "Keaton," I gasped, breaking the kiss for air. "We are in the town hall parking lot. The librarian is watching." He glanced over his shoulder. Sure enough, Mrs. Gable was walking to her car, pretending to look for her keys, but definitely watching us, with a scandalous smile. Keaton cursed softly, lowering me back to the ground, but keeping me pinned. "My place, now." "Yes," I breathed. "Please." The drive to the Rhodes cabin was a blur. I don't remember the music, or the conversation, or the winding roads. I only remember the weight of Keaton's hand on my thigh, his thumb drawing distracting patterns on my jeans, and the way he looked at me every time he shifted gears, like he wanted to pull over and finish what we started in the parking lot. When we finally pulled up to the log cabin, it was dark. No lights, no parents, just the silence of the mountains and the promise of the night. Keaton killed the engine. He didn't wait for me. He was out of the truck and rounding the hood before I had even unbuckled. He opened my door and pulled me out, not giving my feet a chance to touch the gravel before he scooped me up into his arms. "I can walk," I laughed, wrapping my arms around his neck. "Too slow," he growled, carrying me up the porch steps. He fumbled with the keys for a second, a rare moment of clumsiness for a man who could fix anything, before kicking the door open. He carried me inside, kicking the door shut behind us with a heavy thud that sealed out the world. The house was cool, smelling of wood smoke and lemon polish. He didn't put me down. He carried me through the living room, past the kitchen where we'd eaten lasagna, and started up the stairs. "Keaton," I whispered, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm. "Are you sure? I mean, this is us." He stopped on the landing, looking down at me. The moonlight filtering through the window illuminated the sharp angles of his face, the fierce determination in his eyes. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life, Sam," he said, his voice rough with honesty. "I told you, I'm done waiting." He carried me into his bedroom. It was exactly like him, sparse, masculine, dominated by a massive wooden bed, covered in a dark quilt. He set me down gently by the side of the bed, but he didn't step back. He reached out, his fingers trembling slightly as he touched the messy bun on top of my head. He pulled the pins out one by one, letting my hair tumble down around my shoulders. "Beautiful," he murmured. He took a step closer, his hands moving to the buttons of my flannel shirt. "Are you going to tell me to stop?" I looked up at him, at the man who had fixed my roof, defended my honor, and looked at me like I was the only woman in the world who mattered. "No," I whispered, reaching for the hem of his t-shirt. "I'm telling you to hurry up." He grinned, a wicked, devastating expression that made my insides melt. "Your wish is my command, Malloy." And then, finally, there were no more interruptions, no delivery drivers, no antagonists in beige trench coats. Just Keaton, me, and the undeniable fact that falling in love was infinitely more terrifying and more thrilling than falling off a ladder. If there is a scientific formula for the exact moment a human brain completely short-circuits, it involves Keaton Rhodes, a very large wooden bed, and the way his hands felt on my skin like he was mapping new continents. My flannel shirt hit the floor, his t-shirt followed a second later, revealing the kind of torso that should come with a hazard warning for women with weak knees. "You," I managed to say, my voice sounding like I'd just run a marathon at altitude, "are ridiculous. Do you even own body fat? Or are you just made of steel cables and stubbornness?" Keaton didn't answer. He just smirked, a dark, possessive curve of his lips that made my stomach do a traitorous little flip and pulled me against him. The contact was electric. Skin on skin, heat on heat. It was a collision of two worlds that had been orbiting each other for decades. "Less talking, Malloy," he growled, backing me toward the bed. "More focusing." "I am focusing. I'm focusing very hard." My knees hit the mattress, and I tumbled back, pulling him down with me. The bed groaned under our combined weight, a sound that was swallowed by the sudden, desperate press of his mouth against mine. This wasn't the polite, scheduled intimacy I'd had with Paul. Paul liked to schedule romance for Tuesdays after the nightly news. This was chaotic. This was a storm. Keaton kissed me like he was starving, and I was the last meal on earth. His hands were everywhere, rough palms sliding over my ribs, tangling in my hair, grounding me in the moment. "Sam," he rasped against my neck, sending shivers racing down my spine. "Tell me to stop if you stop," I interrupted, wrapping my legs around his waist and pulling him closer. "I will sue you for breach of contract. And emotional distress. And probably arson, because I'm pretty sure you set me on fire." He laughed, a low rumble that vibrated against my chest, and then he stopped talking entirely. The rest of the night was a blur of tangled sheets, moonlight, and the overwhelming realization that I had been settling for black and white my entire life when color existed right here, in a log cabin with a man who smelled like rain and industrial soap. It was messy. It was fierce. And for the first time in forever, I didn't feel like I was going to break. I felt like I was being put back together. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and something frying that smelled suspiciously like heaven. I stretched, my muscles protesting with a delicious sort of ache, and reached out for the warm body that should have been next to me. Empty space. I cracked one eye open. The room was flooded with bright, unforgiving mountain sunlight. Dust motes danced in the beams. I was wearing one of Keaton's t-shirts, which hung to my knees, and the bed looked like it had been the site of a wrestling match. "Keaton?" I croaked. "Kitchen?" His voice boomed from downstairs. I rolled out of bed, tripped over my own jeans, which were inexplicably draped over the lampshade, and padded downstairs. Keaton was standing at the stove, shirtless, wearing low-slung jeans and flipping pancakes with the same focused intensity he used to fix roofs. "Good morning," he said without turning around. "There's coffee in the pot. Don't touch the skillet. It's hot." I walked up behind him and wrapped my arms around his waist, pressing my cheek against his bare back. He was warm and solid. "You cook?" "I survive," he said, turning in my arms to face me. He looked rested, his eyes clear and dancing with amusement. He dropped a quick kiss on my forehead. "And I figured you'd need fuel after the town hall meeting." I groaned, burying my face in his chest. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Among other things." He handed me a mug of coffee. "Eat up. We have a busy day." "We do?" I took a sip. "Perfect. Black, strong, no nonsense." I was planning on hiding under the covers until the heat death of the universe. "Can't," he said, turning back to the pancakes. "I got a call this morning, while you were snoring." I do not snore. I breathe with enthusiasm. I narrowed my eyes. "Who called? Paul? The zoning board? The National Guard?" "The mayor," Keaton said. "He wants to know if the shop is open today. Apparently Mrs. Gable told the entire book club about the Carmel, and they're demanding a batch before noon." I stared at him. "You're joking." "Nope. And my dad called from Ouray. He heard about the meeting. Said to tell you he's proud of you for standing up to that beige menace. And he wants to know when he can expect grandchildren." I choked on my coffee. "Grandchildren? We haven't even gone on a proper date. We had sex in a truck?" "Well, nearly." Keaton grinned, leaning back against the counter. "We can work on the date part. Tonight, dinner. Somewhere that requires a reservation and doesn't involve mud." "I'd like that," I whispered, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the caffeine. "But first," he said, grabbing a set of keys from the counter, "we have to go to the shop. I have a surprise for you." We pulled up to take it or leave it an hour later. The sun was shining, the snow was melting into slush, and the street was surprisingly busy. But something was different. I climbed out of the truck and stared up at the storefront. "Keaton?" I said, my hand flying to my mouth. Over the door, where the old peeling sign had hung for 20 years, was a brand new one. It was beautiful, hand-carved wood, stained a rich mahogany with gold lettering that caught the light. "Take it or leave it, est." 1990 Curiosities and Confections. "When?" I asked, turning to him. My eyes were stinging. "How?" "I've been working on it in the shed for a week," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck, looking suddenly shy. "The old one was rotting, Sam. And after last night, I figured it was time to make it permanent. You're staying. The sign should reflect that." "It's perfect," I sniffled. "I love it. I love you." The words slipped out before I could check them at the gate. Keaton froze. The air between us went still. Then a slow, blinding smile spread across his face. He stepped forward, cupping my face in his hands, ignoring the tourists walking by. "Took you long enough," he murmured. "I've loved you since you walked into the bar and dropped that beer." I broke a bottle. I laughed through the tears. "You broke my brain," he corrected. "And I'm never letting you go." He kissed me, right there on the sidewalk, under the new sign. It was a kiss of promise, of future, of 1,000 arguments about paint colors and 1,000,000 mornings of pancakes. "Excuse me," a voice interrupted. We broke apart. An elderly woman in a bright purple parka was standing there, tapping her watch. "Are you opening? I need 3 pounds of that Scandal caramel. I have a bridge game at 2. I wiped my eyes and laughed. "Yes, ma'am, we're opening." I unlocked the door, the bell jingling its familiar welcome. The shop smelled of lemon polish and old paper. Bartholomew the elk stared down from the wall, looking majestic and slightly judgmental. "Hey, Bart," I whispered. "I brought backup." Keaton followed me in, flipping the sign to open. The day was a whirlwind. Mrs. Gable came in with the entire book club. The mayor bought 6 jars of caramel. Tourists, drawn by the gossip and the new sign, flooded the place. I sold the vintage tin robot, 3 sets of antique doorknobs, and enough candy to pay my rent for 3 months. Around 4 o'clock, the rush died down. I was wiping down the counter when the door opened one last time. I braced myself for Paul, but it was a courier. "Delivery for Samantha Malloy," the kid said, handing me a flat envelope. I signed for it, my stomach tightening. Keaton stepped up beside me, his presence a warm wall of support. "Open it," he said. I ripped the envelope. Inside was a bill from a dry cleaner in Denver. Item: 1 Chanel suit, cream. Treatment: heavy stain removal, caramel. Total: $450. Attached was a sticky note in Paul's precise, angular handwriting. "Samantha, consider this your final severance package. I'm listing the condo. Mother says the air in Telluride is too thin for civilized people anyway. Bania. Nas P." I stared at the bill, then at the note. "He sent me a bill," I said, my voice flat. "He's petty," Keaton said, reaching for his wallet. "I'll write a check. It's worth every penny to get him out of our lives." "No," I said, a smile curling the corners of my mouth. I reached under the counter and pulled out a lighter I used for the scented candles. "I have a better idea." We walked out to the alley behind the shop. The sun was dipping behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of violet and fire. I held the bill up. Keaton flicked the lighter. The flame caught the edge of the paper. We watched as the debt, and the last tether to my old life, curled into ash and floated away on the mountain breeze. "Very therapeutic," Keaton noted, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "Highly recommended." I agreed. We went back inside. I locked the door and turned the sign to closed. "So?" Keaton said, leaning against the counter, his eyes dark with intent. "About that reservation." "Cancel it," I said, walking toward him. I grabbed the lapels of his jacket and pulled him down. "I have a better idea. There's a frozen lasagna at your parents' house. And a very big bed." Keaton grinned, lifting me up until I was sitting on the counter, right next to the jar of bourbon caramel chews. "I like the way you think, Malloy. I learned from the best," I whispered. He kissed me, and as the sun set over Telluride, casting long shadows across the floorboards of the shop my mother built, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I wasn't just the girl who got stuck in a window. I was the girl who found her footing, saved her legacy, and snagged the guy with the really nice glutes. "Keaton?" He mumbled against my neck. "Watch out for the spice jars." He laughed, sweeping them aside with a crash that I didn't even mind. "Forget the jars," he growled. "I'm only interested in the sugar." And for the first time in my life, I decided to take it and never, ever leave it.